We're here with Professor David Clark at the OECD. Professor Clark, thank you for agreeing to talk to Informilo. Internet service providers are arguing that video will cripple the internet and using it as an excuse to place caps on usage. You gave a talk here today saying that ain't necessarily so. Could you tell us briefly why you share that belief?
Well, so let me try giving you a nuanced answer. Usage on the internet is not free. Networks cannot carry infinite number of bits for $0. I think for a well-designed network, you can afford to pay for the capacity that we need to carry video around. But if we simply allow video to be downloaded 24 hours a day at peak rates, it's going to have a material effect on the cost of the ISPs. So I think when the ISPs say that, well, I would never use the word cripple because that's a bias word. That word's got passion built in or advocacy built in. I do think that video is going to change the cost point for the ISPs, and I'm actually of the opinion, and I know I'm a minority here and a traitor to the cause, that we are not going to be able to sustain the all-you-can-eat model of the internet. Because a typical user today may download 1% of the traffic that he could get at his peak rate, and if you increase the usage of the internet by a factor of 100, if you take that 1% to 100%, that's going to be a cost the ISP can't sustain. So I think that putting in price caps or price tiers is actually a reasonable response to video. But if you use it as an opportunity to price them at 10 times the actual cost, if the market is not driving the cost down to a reasonable, the price down to a reasonable fraction of cost, then we've had an opportunity to do a second thing when we were trying to do the first thing, which is put hot and spicy margins back into the internet, and that's wrong. So what I was talking here was about some simplistic cost models, and you know, if it costs 10 cents to deliver a gigabyte, well, 10 cents is not zero. It adds up over time. But it doesn't mean that the cost of your internet is going to go to $150 a month. The cost of your internet might go from $40 a month to $50 a month or $60 a month. And that's entirely different than somebody saying $100 a month or $220 a month. So it's not absolute caps that worry me. It's whether we get realistic numbers in the system.
And according to your research, if the ISPs play it smart, their own costs will not go up enormously, and therefore whatever additional costs they must pass on to the consumer should just be, reasonable.
Yeah. I mean, you can deliver video very efficiently over the internet. You can cache the content near the consumer, which reduces the cost. You can have what I will call managed peer-to-peer, which is to say that when you download the video from another peer in the system, you download it from one that's near you as opposed to going to the other side of the globe accidentally. Measures like that will lead to more cost-efficient architectures, and that's fine. Those are good technical steps, as long as business practice does not get in their way.
Now, Professor Clark, you've been very involved in the Internet's architecture since the 1970s, and your research is now on the Internet of the future, what it'll be like 10 to 15 years from now. Can you give us a glimpse of your thoughts on that topic?
Well, in my list of concerns about the present Internet, I would put poor security as the first concern. We need a network that's materially more secure. I'd like a network that is at least as available as the telephone system. I'd like a network that's easier to manage. And that includes the consumer. It would be nice to have a network that was easier to understand when you put it in your house and it doesn't quite work. I am concerned about economic viability and whether all of the parties in the value chain are going to make the right kind of investment. My concern is not that there's some class of application we can't support. That's not the issue. The health of the network is going to be conditioned by the sort of social and economic embedding of the network. It's not the technology that we're worried about.
You mentioned security as a chief concern, and we've seen in recent weeks lots and lots of headlines about cybersecurity, and we also see this as being used as a buzzword by governments who may use this as an excuse to try to install national borders on the internet and balkanize it. Does that worry you?
Well, balkanize worries me. Excuse me. The question of national borders puzzles me in the sense that in the early days of the internet, people were gloriously enthusiastic about the lack of any sort of jurisdictional boundaries, and there are a lot of cases where now, sorry, where it actually seems as if a little bit of jurisdiction is not a bad thing. But yes, it could swing back and forth. And there's another way to think about that, which is, let me give you another piece of imagery. If we were to put up surveillance cameras in cyberspace, what could they see? Do packets carry identifying information in them that, whether the senders like it or not, can somehow be traced back to them? Is that tracing back something that can be done only with a tremendous amount of work or with a very low work factor? I'm much more concerned with propositions that say that packets could only be sent if they've got something in them which allows the sender and the receiver to be identified independent of their wishes, because that really gives tremendous surveillance power. If you're going across jurisdictional boundaries, but only very bluntly can you tell what's being done, then anybody who tries to regulate that is trying to regulate with a blunt instrument. And so there's a balance of power there. I think that it's going to be much more common that parties on the internet only want to talk to each other if they know who they are. I'd like to tilt the playing field in a way that I like, and I happen to believe that in many cases the use of what I might call private credentials will actually meet the needs of all the actors just fine.
And if we allow the government to give IDs?
Well, I don't mind if the government gives me an ID so long as I don't have to show it to anybody. Now, if the only way I could identify myself to you was by showing my government credential, there was no other credential you were allowed to accept, that's different. Okay, and in fact, we're having debates. You know, in the United States, we've had to pull back on people's reflexive use of social security numbers to identify people. It was really not, it was concerned about cross-correlation and privacy and so forth. If there was only one credential and I got it from the government, I had to use it for everything. That could be cross-correlated. Everything I do could be cross-correlated. You could develop this tremendous database. But it's not that I object to having a government-issued certificate. It's that I don't want them to be able to force me to use it.
And as a last question, what do you think is the biggest threat to the future of the internet, and what's the biggest opportunity?
Well, I really think that there are two threats we ought to be keeping our eye on, and we've already talked about. And one of them is whether we've got the industry structure and the economics right so that all the actors are prepared to invest at a level that's suitable to sustain the internet without in the process trying to impose so many controls on the network that in fact the network loses its character. And we have to, there's two rocks and we have to go between them there. I'm worried about economic stagnation of investment, and I'm certainly worried about loss of openness or the loss of the platform character of the innovation for random people to come in and invent random things like, you know. And I think the other one is security, because I think that there's enough concern about security right now, there's enough anxiety about security right now, that people are actually holding back from doing some things on the network that they'd like to do.
The internet 15 years from now, what will be the most different thing about it?
Well, with luck, the user experience won't look that different. With luck, the user experience will be a little more trustworthy. It'll be a little easier to do. When you bring your wireless base station home and it doesn't work for some reason, you'll be able to debug it without calling your geeky nephew. But it'll still be the same kind of applications. The applications may be a little different because the applications will be more sensitive to the security issues, the manageability issues. For example, more and more when you get email, it'll be signed. You know, you'll be able to look at it and see what it came from. Now, the signature may be private between the two of us, but with luck, we'll work this out so that consumers just find this natural and they don't see this as a big transition. So I think if we're successful, we'll change a lot of stuff underneath, and the user experience will actually be comfortably familiar.